Some games show up beautiful, some are just benign. 4 new games to talk about. Let's look at some design. Video game graphic design, that is. That's what we're talking about today. Things like menus, UI, UX, color choice, font choice, animation, character design. You know, the presentation of information. If this is your first time here, welcome. Start with this episode and check out the series playlist at the end. Don't worry about spoilers today. We won't be focusing on anything too far into any of these games. Also, don't worry too much if your favorite game is in a bad design segment. These are all actually really fun. Some of the specifics could just use a little work for a couple. Maybe head back to the drawing board to fix them up. And what a beautiful drawing board it can be with today's episode sponsor, Milanote. If you haven't tried Milanote yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's great. Milanote is a tool that helps you organize your projects and collaborate with others. Any project you have where you need everyone involved to be on the same page, Milanote can make sure that happens. We use it here for getting a handle on the scope of our own scripts. I can drop in image references, links to inspiration, structural notes, and to-do lists, arrange them exactly how I want, and then share them with anyone else working on the same thing. They can add their own notes and material in real time, and we all get to keep iterating on the ideas until we all get something we understand and can execute. Milanote is built for this type of collaboration, and its tools are geared to let you do it way more easily than if you try to make it work in like a Google Doc or something. They've got great templates specifically for game design too. You and your group can work together on a visual design doc, making sure everyone's on the same page and that no good ideas are left behind. If you're building a game, Milanote is a killer tool for organizing and sharing your designs in an easy, collaborative, and dare I say beautiful way. Add stuff, mark it up, take notes, connect the dots, dig deeper, make it pretty, and do it all with a super easy drag and drop interface. If you're in school right now, it's a great tool for all kinds of group projects too. Milanote is free, with no time limit. Seriously, use the link in the description to sign up now to get started. Bring your projects to life with Milanote. Good design. I love great art direction, more so when you can feel it seep into every aspect of a game, not only its look. This entire Good Design, Bad Design series started as a love letter to Persona 5's UI and aesthetic. Its kinetic animation and bold black on white ransom note text were striking on release and still hold up great. The fluid motion from menu to menu, both inside and outside fights, with each command one tap away was as pleasant to look at as it was to play. Making something that looks and feels that good is not easy. Katsura Hashino was the director, and he's gone on record as thinking the design process was, quote, really annoying. The font alone was a nightmare, with tons of manual tweaking to get the right balance to make the ransom letters easily readable. The effort was worth it though, and the presentation style had survived, with some changes, in Persona's later sequels and remakes. But at some point, there would be a successor, and that time is now. Metaphor ReFantazio. Now, you can't hype a successor to one of the most striking games of the last decade and then drop the ball in the art department. That wouldn't do it all. So someone had to ask the question, how the hell do we follow up on the art direction of Persona 5? I don't know. How about we throw it back a few hundred years? Metaphor isn't about stealing hearts, it's about struggling for political power in a fantastical society. So it does away with the thief motifs and brings in a dose of the Renaissance. The UI's theming evokes the drawings, notes, and art of that era. The high contrast ransom note style has been replaced with painterly touches. The game is filled with ink and sketch motifs, background color blocks and border margins that seem like they could be physical brushstrokes. Thin, scratchy guidelines on borders and for decoration. Most UI elements incorporate motion, but not distracting amounts of it. The text boxes use shifting brushstrokes in the corners. The character portraits all cycle through slight shading variations to add to visual interest while being subtle enough to not demand your attention. The game's fonts still have that wild mix of weights, styles, and sizes that were in P5, but they're definitely more reserved this time. The art direction repeatedly goes back to the well of the idea of scientific discovery, You can't go 5 minutes without something alluding to that age. The archetypes, essentially character classes, are laid out on a graph evoking Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, itself a symbol of the merging of art and science from this time period. The Velvet Room replacement is called Academia, and is filled with books on every subject, astrolabes, and a ginormous statue that also evokes the Vitruvian Man. Your characters, they too, are the Vitruvian Man, if that connection wasn't clear enough already. Each new bond, the system that replaces Persona's social links, is sealed with a handshake, whose depiction evokes the high contrast and deep scratchy shadows in the illustrations in Grey's Anatomy, another iconic merging of art and science. Many monsters and bosses are homages to the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch, an early Renaissance painter, and one of the earliest people you could consider a fantasy artist. The game isn't fully stuck in the past though. Here and there, touches of the modern world sneak in. The intro video has parchment documents being redacted. The street shops in the capital look a little more modern than you'd expect in the Renaissance. The game's visual direction fits with its story themes, where concepts from our world work their way into this fantasy realm. Hoshino has talked about how early in its development, the game felt much more like a standard Western fantasy setting, and adding in contemporary elements helped it feel much more like its own unique world. The whole thing is a metaphor after all. The combined effect evokes a world on the brink of change, while combining it with the surreal fantasy elements the studio has always been known for. A setting rooted in the familiar, but nothing quite exactly like you'd expect, with a wide enough variety of inspiration to discover fun new touches all the time. It's a cohesive, unmistakable art direction.
Bad design.
Everyone loves a classic. Art, music, architecture, any piece of design work that stands the test of time. But classic doesn't mean universal. Something amazing in one context can be very out of place in another. So too with UI elements. A piece of the UI that works perfectly once, in one place, in one game, may fail to meet the needs of another. It might be obvious that the same UI doesn't work for two unrelated games, but what happens when a UI element wears out its welcome within the same series? Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is the first top-down Zelda game in over a decade, and the first one made in the modern open-air era that was kicked off in Breath of the Wild. In this style, puzzle solutions are designed to be more open-ended and let players approach problems in their own way. It's also the first one starring Zelda. Good job, Zelda. The game revolves around the titular echoes, copies of objects and enemies that Zelda can summon on command. Each echo does its own unique thing, and you'll constantly cycle through these to fight, explore, and solve puzzles. Need to cross a gap? You could make a bridge out of water blocks, or beds, or summon a bunch of Strantulas and climb on their webs to cross. It reminds me a little of Scribblenauts, with how wide a range of options all your echoes will provide you. Playing Summoner while in combat and sending a bunch of offensive echoes to fight for you can be very fun too, once you get the hang of it. There's just one problem. This menu sucks at its job. Back in Breath of the Wild, they introduced this quick select equipment menu. Hold down the direction on the D-pad to pause the action and bring up a single horizontal row of equipable items. Scroll to what you want, let go, and you're back in business. Weapons, shields, bows, arrows, and your special Sheikah runes all had their own carousel and were quick enough to scroll through. Everyone loves it. Now jump ahead to Tears of the Kingdom. Lots of the game's UI is unchanged at a basic level, but we've got a whole new category to fold in: materials. Through abilities like Fuse and Ultra Hand, you'll be selecting from a huge amount of materials all the time, and it's all shoved into a single new carousel. You're now scrolling through dozens of things to get from one side of the menu to the other. It doesn't matter that most of the items are useless fluff only good for cooking, you'll be scrolling through all of that too. Echoes of Wisdom made the same problem worse. You'll be gathering a ton of echoes throughout your adventure, especially at the start, and you'll need to swap between them frequently. The system becomes unwieldy very early on, and managing all your echoes becomes the most annoying part of the moment-to-moment gameplay. The single horizontal row menu is way too slow and narrow to be effective. Roughly halfway through the game, you'll have enough echoes that it'll take 10 whole seconds to see them all. If you try to get creative, or use many echoes, or experiment with your lesser used ones, you'll find that it's way more of a pain than it should be. You can only equip one echo at a time, even though there are multiple free buttons that could be assigned something. The only saving grace is the last use and last learn sorting options to move common echoes to the front of the line, but it's just not enough. There is a grid-based notebook menu, which fixes a few of these problems, but it's an extra press, and there aren't any additional sorting options like the regular menu, so it's not nearly as useful as you'd think. The gridded design in the default quick menu would go a long way towards fixing the problem, but as it is, it's just too slow. It worked in Breath of the Wild because it only gave you so many things per carousel, so you couldn't actually be that far from any given item. Sticking to the same UI design under completely different conditions is a great thing for visual cohesion, and not having to teach a whole new thing to a player, but the UI element is just not fit for purpose, and that overwhelms any other benefit that not changing the element could provide. Whenever you're borrowing a solution from some other context, remember to check if the problem it's solving has changed.
Good design.
There's a lot of games whose puzzles feel tacked on, like you're traveling in a strange place, but once in a while there's some question from an IQ test that will get you a key, or a slide puzzle to get to an exit, and you have to solve it before you can re-immerse yourself in the world. The puzzles in these games can sometimes not feel like they belong. Chants of Sennaar feels like the opposite of that. Chants of Sennaar is Context Clues the game. Well, it's Tower of Babel the game, but the only way you're going to get to the top is through context. You're traveling through different communities of people, all living in the same tower, all with wildly different cultures, and all speaking completely different languages that you do not understand. It's up to you to piece together what's actually going on in this society, but first, you'll need to write some dictionaries. Beyond your typical adventure game puzzle set, the crown jewel of Chants of Sennaar's gameplay is its language deduction puzzles. You'll be defining and translating several dozen glyphs in each language. You'll meet people speaking to you in glyphs, see them carved into stone, on tapestries, find signposts written in them, and it's on you to figure out what they could all mean. They could be any word, really. You can pencil in your translation guesses, and the game will auto-translate any glyph you see in the world with it, so you can see in different contexts if your assumption makes sense. To get some assurance you're correct, the game borrows a page from the Return of the Obra Dinn. Every so often, once you've recently discovered some new glyphs or contexts, the game will pause and have you try to match a glyph with an illustration of its meaning. If you get all of the glyphs on that page right, each of those symbols' true English definitions will lock in and be revealed in-world from there on. The game is a deduction puzzle. As you figure out new words, you can read more and more of what's around you. It lets you grasp more context, and slowly this world's culture and people reveal themselves to you. As you travel between areas, the languages will also change. The glyphs aren't haphazard. They're inspired by completely different real-world languages and different cultures across time. Each language is visually distinct and contains subtle details. The simple glyphs might look similar to the object they're describing. This smiley face is one of the first things you see, and it means hello. Easy enough. The more complicated concepts contain details that might help you deduce meaning. Once you name a few of them, you might notice that they're made up of subglyphs, not unlike the radicals that make up some parts of some Eastern languages. You might know that this glyph means God, but add another glyph that surrounds it, like this box here, and it might change the words to mean the house for God, or church. It gets more complicated with grammar rules and the like, but this process of deduction is the game, and it's a mystery whose answers give you the immediate satisfaction like any puzzle, but also the slow burning satisfaction of being able to better understand all of what surrounds you. It's really a monumental task to make a world feel this believable and organic. Julian Moya, creative director at the developer Rundisk, had an interview with GameDeveloper.com where he talks about how incredibly difficult it was designing the languages, the people, the world, and the puzzle design all simultaneously. Any additions or changes would have ripple effects throughout the game, requiring new words or changing context, or implying other things, and made them have to almost lock in everything at once. The immense amount of prep work they did paid off huge. The sheer attention to detail this game has put into making its world, dialogue, story, and mechanics feel like one cohesive whole is unlike any other game I can remember. Chants of Sennaar is an immersive experience in the grandest sense of the word. Go check it out.
Bad design.
No game can be designed in a vacuum. Every player arrives with their own set of expectations. Those can be genre conventions, like how you expect pulling a trigger will make a bullet fire in a first-person shooter. They can be cultural conventions, like which direction you read events on a timeline in. They can also be UI conventions, like all the stuff that Lorelei and the Laser Eyes tossed aside when they built their menu navigation. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes is a very good puzzle game. You're working your way through an eccentric movie director's hotel, filled to the brim with puzzles, locked doors, mysterious clues, and holes in the floor to fall into. It's a little bit Seventh Guest, a little bit Twin Peaks, well, a lot Twin Peaks actually, and a little bit The Room. The game, not the movie. Uncover the director's history, unlock dozens of rooms, and figure out what exactly is going on, so you can start your car again and get the hell out of here. It's a very intricate escape room style experience, where you're piecing together clues from all sorts of sources scattered throughout the house, and using them to unlock more rooms with more clues and more puzzles. Look through conversations, film synopsis notes, posters, cards, hotel schedules, phone books, and 100 other little things to solve these puzzles. Luckily, and this would wreck the game if they didn't do it like this, you've got a photographic memory, and can reference all of this material in the game's extensive menus as you wander through the house. With all of these pieces to put together over time, you're going to be doing a lot of menu diving. A lot. And while you're in there, one minor design choice will bite your ankles. Forever. Every face button, every bumper, and every trigger does the exact same action in Lorelei. You can press pause or select to get to the quit the game menu, but besides those two, every button does the exact same thing. And that thing depends entirely on where you're standing. Are you not next to anything in particular? Tapping anything will then open your personal status screen. Next to a puzzle? Tapping will zoom in on the puzzle. Standing near a placard with information? It'll pop up so you can read it. Will this coffee maker eventually need something from your inventory to work? It'll open up your inventory. No, you don't have it yet. This all sounds great. The game knows exactly what you should want to do, and adjusts every action to that. There's only one single thing you could have wanted to do while you're standing there, right? You'd never, say, want to open up the status menu when you're standing too close to this clock. That'd be silly. So you can't. Anything you do near this thing will open the puzzle, and since you've opened the puzzle, you definitely want to solve the puzzle right now. There's no way that you misclicked, so you can't get out of the screen until you tried to submit an answer. You definitely know how to solve this puzzle, right? Instead of having a universal action to quit out of a puzzle or a menu, every puzzle and every menu have their own unique way to exit. This screen you have to scroll over to the top right corner. This screen you have to pick an option in the upper left. This puzzle you have to tap up to get to the shackle to submit an answer. This one you have to highlight this middle bit. Hope you can find it. Sometimes you've got to let an animation play out, even when you know there's zero chance the solution worked, and you didn't want to be on this screen in the first place. This is all an explicit design choice by Simogo. Their dev blog talks about wanting to make sure the game experience isn't hindered by complex controls. Quote, an intricate meal should not be hindered by a complicated fork. That's a great goal, but you can't remove complexity forever. There can be a lower bound before bad things start to happen. Instead of a complicated fork, Simogo has given players a morphing, unpredictable fork. Is it more complicated? Maybe not if you fully trust the process, as actions shift from context to context. Most of the time the game is correct, but not always. And when it's wrong, players are going to make easy mistakes, the most frustrating category of mistakes. I just completely disagree with the plan. One dedicated button to exit out of a menu is not an overcomplication of the interface, and adding it as an option wouldn't remove the capability of finishing the game without it. Again, this game is really good, and this is one very tiny inconvenience, but it's one that appears in literally every interaction the game has. A penny might not be much, but you can still drown in a swimming pool of pennies. If you've got a segment you'd like to see on the next Good Design, Bad Design, leave a comment, or head down there to talk about how you just picked up Chants of Sennaar and how much it's changed your life already. Great design is about paying attention to context and thinking about how each part fits into the whole. The more work you put into making every element of a game work together, into making UI elements fit their purpose exactly, into telling a consistent story, into a cohesive style, the better the final result.